So the Joe Sestak White House story quickly becoming a political hot potato in the nation's capital, but the White House and even some Republicans are downplaying the controversy as an inside the Beltway story with not a whole lot of traction around the rest of the country. So how are voters going to see it? Joining us now is Scott Stanzel, who is former Deputy Press Secretary under President George W. Bush, and Richard Socarides, who is a former advisor to President Bill Clinton, a player in this story. Gentlemen, thanks for coming in. And Scott, no less than President George W. Bush's former chief ethics advisor says this is not a story. Republicans should move away from it. What do you think?
Well, with all due respect to Richard Painter, who you're referencing, I worked with him at the White House. He's a wonderful person, a wonderful lawyer. It's not up to Richard, nor is it up to President Obama's chief defense attorney in the form of Bob Bauer to investigate this. You know, there are some people that have said that as many as 3 different statutes, federal statutes, may have been violated, and without a question, it should be looked at also from the Hatch Act perspective, which is the law that governs political activity by federal employees. So there's an independent office called the Office of Special Counsel that can investigate these things.
So, Richard, at the very least,
that should happen, and we should let that process go forward.
Richard, at the very least, a lot of folks in Washington must be feeling kind of nostalgic, mentioning your boss's name and the word scandal in the same sentence again.
I'm not
it's sort
feeling
of like
nostalgic.
97 all over again.
I'm not feeling nostalgic.
How
but
are
I was
you feeling?
Rick, I was going to ask Scott about not only Mr. Painter, but the Attorney General, the former Republican Attorney General, Michael Mukasey, who I think was Attorney General when Scott was a part of the White House staff, said that he thought that this was a real stretch to even look into this. I mean, I think this whole thing, this whole episode is completely exaggerated. It's a completely exaggerated diversion, trying to divert attention from the real issues in this Senate race in Pennsylvania. And, you know, people are saying this is politics as usual, but I think it's just politics. I think there's a big difference between politics as usual and politics. When people say politics as usual, what they're complaining about is a system where the lobbyists by the insurance companies and the drug companies and the big banks get their way no matter who's in power. This is just politics and democracy in action.
Scott, let me jump in here because, lawyers are going to say what lawyers are going to say on both sides of this issue. But for the average Joe out there, we mentioned what voters are thinking about this. We've got the midterms coming up. I think that a lot of folks out there might be saying, well, it might not be legal, or maybe it was legal, but it sure doesn't. It kind of looks sleazy, don't you think?
Well, let me ask this question to Richard. Let's turn back the clock 6 years ago. If Arlen Specter, then running against Pat Toomey in the Republican primary, if President George W. Bush had authorized Karl Rove to talk to former President George H.W. Bush and offer Pat Toomey a job, and that had come out, and the White House had covered that up for a year, and then the cat was finally out of the bag, and that became known, and then Alberto Gonzales, our White House counsel, had said, well, we looked into it, no big deal here, move along. Do you think that
Fox News alert? I'm sorry to interrupt here, but we do have a news
Scott
conference.
and Richard. We apologize for breaking in.